My parents' story is a big part of my story. When we look at our human lives, we see that where we came from, the people that brought us into this world are a big part of our story. My mother, Lana, was born in 44 in Montana, and during the course of her life, um, her parents moved from Montana to Idaho to Washington, and she ended up as an adult in Washington State. My mother was raised in a home that, as I said, started out Catholic. My grandpa was part of his family company. They are wheat farmers in Montana. And so making wheat in Montana was what they did. And so my mother's mother's mother was the daughter of a cowboy, and my mother's father was the son of a wheat farmer. And so they got together. My grandpa was 1 year younger than my grandma, and they got together. They had my mom, and shortly after having my mom, they were introduced to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as I said before in my stories, they joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My grandfather first sold books for them and then became a pastor and was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. So my mother, Lana Taddage at the time, was a daughter of a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, which is a very unique church. My father's parents, as I think his mother stayed home, and his father was a welder for Boeing. They were in the Seattle area, and so they at times lived in a tent. They didn't always have shoes. There were 5 children, and I think the 6th one was adopted into a different family. And my father's mother and father were very young. They had the 5 children. My dad was the 4th, I think, and they had a very chaotic childhood. And like I said, my father decided as a child that he would not live a life of poverty, which is where he was raised. My mother, being a pastor's daughter, was from a middle class environment. My father from a very poor environment, and he decided early on that he would not live in a poor environment as an adult. He also was very interested from a young age in dentistry. He loved the dentist that he saw. He loved dentistry. And so that was an excellent opportunity for him. At first, he was a roofer and was working for a company there in Seattle, and the guy there, him and the guy that ran the company were very close. I think that one of the options would have been for him to have become an owner of that company, done very well with that as well. They are multimillionaire family running a very large roofing company in Seattle. However, my dad decided to go to school and become a dentist, and as well was a very successful multimillionaire dentist in his own, having a very large practices throughout his lifetime. So his goal of not living in poverty was very much accomplished for himself. And so those are my parents. One time, my dad had just gotten out of the army. He was drafted and was in the white coats because Seventh-day Adventist, he was raised in and out of the church. He always moved in and out of the church during my lifetime. At the time that my parents met, my dad was very much in the church, and he had just gotten out of the military. He was drafted during the Vietnam War, and he had come back. He had a couple of really close friends who were also Seventh-day Adventists in Seattle. And those two close friends, one of them, they were always really close friends for him his entire life. And one of them met my mother's sister at that time. My mother had twin sisters that were 3 years younger than her. And so her sister, Zita, married one of my dad's friends. And my dad met my mom and married her. And at the same time, my mother's other sister, Zita and Rita, the twins, Rita married a guy from the Adventist church that she met as well. All three of them met guys at camp meeting, which is an event that they have every year in the Adventist church where they camp and have meetings. Camp meeting. They camp out and have meetings for an entire week. During that week, they all met and fell in love and got married. And also that was in a place called Auburn, Washington, which is a place that I went for camp meeting for a very long time as a child. Anyway, so they'd all met there. I believe it was that camp meeting. I could be wrong, but I think it was. Anyway, they all met at camp meeting. They all got to know each other. They all decided to get married. And when my mother met my father, her father said to her, "You won't be happy being married to a roofer. You shouldn't marry him." And it is true that my mother would only be happy being married to a very wealthy and successful man. So she decided to go to a different state Michigan. And she ran off to Michigan. She had just finished nursing and started working over there. And that's where all the Seventh-day Adventist pastors go to college in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And so she moved over there so she could meet a pastor and marry a pastor, because she knew that that would be best for her. And while she was over there, my dad had fallen in love with her and missed her. So he drove all the way over there and told her, professed his love, asked her to marry him, and brought her back. And they got married there in Seattle. So I have no idea whether it was a control issue of you're going to marry me or else, or if it was strictly I'm in love with you and I'm in love with you, and a true love. I see it as a true love story. And my dad and mom always had that level of true love in their lives. I think that it kind of gave me a feeling that marriage and true love would solve all your problems and bring you to that one true person you should be with. And I think I've always looked for that in my life and haven't found it because it's pretty rare and probably not all that it appeared. Anyway, but it's a very romantic story. My mother moved away and my dad drove over there, professed his love, and brought her home. So they got married. Zita and Dick got married, and Rita was married to her husband. On a side note, her and her husband moved to San Francisco, and then he came out as gay, and they became excellent friends. Rather than my aunt Rita was a very open-minded person, and certainly my mother did not allow me to associate with her at all because she was such an open-minded person. My mother did associate with Zita and Dick. They had 2 beautiful children. They were my cousins that I spent a lot of time with and connected with. I love them dearly. And she did stay in the church. Zita did, and she stayed quite a bit like my mom. So my mom was willing to be friends with her. And so that was a blessing. Even though we moved to the town where my dad's aunt, Gladys, was, my dad's mother's sister, and all of those things, the family was there, big part was there. My mother never felt comfortable with my dad's family until much later, so I didn't really grow up knowing any of my family. So I really knew very little of my family growing up. Because my mother, it was more important to her to be with people who believed the same as her, rather than people who were familial and close to us. So I wanted to share a little bit about my parents from an emotional perspective, my mom was always very jealous of her sisters. She felt like once they were born that they were a higher priority to her parents than herself. And she always felt, I think, a little controlled and manipulated by her parents, through their beliefs. And I think that those kind of pushed her toward the same type of way of relating. And then my dad, he really pushed away and rejected most of his family. He felt like they were overweight and not successful in life, and he wanted something very different in his life. He was not shown how to love or care for people very much as a child, and so he struggled with that as a father. He did everything he could to be loving and generous. My dad was a very generous person, always gave a lot to everyone. My mom was not a generous person. She was the opposite and was always telling him that he gave too much. And the two of them had a very weird Madeline love, but didn't, it's like when you love someone, but you don't necessarily like them. That was kind of their weird connection. They were not able to demonstrate a loving, committed relationship because that had not been demonstrated to them. So I think that's about all I want to talk about right now. I just wanted to, explain a little bit about So after my discussion, do you have any questions that you'd like to know more about?